My name is Delbert Richardson, and I'm a community scholar, second-generation storyteller. And I have an amazing museum called the American History Traveling Museum, The Unspoken Truth. Artifacts, total, I would say I'd have to guess a couple of hundred. And as far as the storyboards and the signs, I would say 150 or more. And that's a guess because I've never counted them, but I know I have a lot of information. I don't have any control over how the work impacts people, but I do know that if I provide them some information, the potential for them to have a different understanding is a lot greater. Being a collector, I've always looked at the items as being the most important piece, but I'm learning also too and embracing that I am probably the most important piece because I make the museum and the items come to life. So I'm really excited about being here because I get vacation goers to the Seattle area, and I teach history through a lens, a non-sanitized lens. So I teach history that's not taught in our schools. I'm looking for it, bam. Is this contemporary enough for history? I added the question mark so we can have a discussion around, what do you think? Born in Detroit, raised in Seattle, and born in 1954. If you know anything about American history, 1954 is a very turbulent time regarding civil rights. So as a black child, I had no exposure to my history in elementary school, in middle school, or high school. I didn't know I was black until I got to college. This is probably the first time that Jim Crow is going to wrap around here, but since there's so many issues going on right now around race and around domestic terrorism, I want to make sure that I supported the belief that domestic terrorism is not overseas, it's here by the images in my museum. The museum's broken into 4 sections. The first section is Mother Africa. In that section, we talk about the great contributions that Africans have made, not just in Africa, not just in the Americas, but the world as well. The second section is called chattel slavery, but the definition is movable property. Third section is Jim Crow, where I teach the racial caste system that's specifically geared around white superiority and inferior order of other ethnic groups. The last section, which I believe is the most important section, is a section that's connected to perseverance, resistance, and courage, and it's called Still We Rise, which consists of a 40-foot display of everyday items that African Americans or black people have invented, patented, or improved upon. We never talk about the contributions that Africa as a continent has made to the world. So these are skill sets that were brought to the Americas to help build America. This is terracotta, which is masonry work. When you think about metallurgy, you think about carpentry, you think about masonry. These are just a few of the skills that were predominant in the African culture. But also, if you think about my ancestors were the first ones to invent the first written language, which is metaneter, which the Greeks called hieroglyphics. I believe one of the biggest untold stories in regards to world history is that there's a major contributions by Africans in the areas of medicine, math, science, technology, astronomy. You see that the great African had a big part in introducing those kinds of great discoveries to the world. First of all, my name is Delbert.
Delbert,
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
And your name?
Patricia.
So, when I set up this museum, just about every time I set up is different because this is a spiritual experience even for me. One of my main focuses now with the work is so how do I support schools and children and young adults with having a better understanding of this rich history that's not taught. So me and a couple other friends are currently in the works of developing a professional development portion of the museum that will actually go in and support ethnic studies, will support diversity, will support cultural competence. There is a big need in our public schools and private schools to help primarily the educators, better understand the cultural component that's necessary to be effective in teaching children and young adults.
Do the kids pick up on this? Do they say anything about it when you're in the classroom?
No, and that's why I'm a storyteller.
Okay.
Because, it's so important that I look at the museum through a lens that they're not familiar with, so I'll explain those things so they can make the connection. I've always collected Black Americana. That's something that African Americans do when we see images of ourselves on postcards, or there's a famous guy on a cream of wheat label. So we collect those things because it's part of our history that connects us to our ancestry to a certain degree. But when I started doing the research and started finding out that there was more to my identity, particularly the African part, I became extremely excited. Because we don't talk about Africa in elementary school or middle school in any capacity at all. When we talk about world history, we talk about what? European history. So can I point one thing out to you two down here? You know about Africa, right? The continent of Africa? You heard about Africa as a continent, right? Yeah. Okay. There's quite a few takeaways from the museum experience, and that's what I call the work I do. It's one thing for me to talk about it, it's another thing for me to show the actual items, but to be in the space of the museum is an experience. Some of the feedback that I get from people is amazing. You got those? You gonna post those on your Facebook? Good, good, good. Oh, that's okay. Won't you friend me? Won't you friend me? The world is changing. You look at the LBG community, you look at racial differences as well as religious differences. It's no longer about black and white. It's how do we honor differences and how do we respect others that don't look like, speak, or feel or believe the same the way we do. And the museum is just a starting place for us to start the process of self-healing, which will lead to community healing. So if you were to pick your two favorite inventions on the table, what would they be? What is that right there?
A breathing mask.
Is that right? So let's see here. You're a good reader, aren't you? Why don't you just read that there? What does that say?
The breathing mask is very useful.
So what they're saying is that when firefighters go on this fires, when there's a lot of smoke, you can put this device on so you can breathe. So an African American, somebody black like me, made this device so it allows firefighters and others to put these devices on to save other people. Why aren't we being taught this in our classrooms? And I give them a couple of examples, but then they say this needs to be told. This needs to be taught in the classrooms on a regular basis. You know how old this language is? This is before Amharic.
Oh, wow.
Say it again, guz.
Good.
See, I can't, guz.
Good.
Guz.
Yeah.
Guz. Oh, and you're what, 18? Please do not lose your connection to your culture and your heritage.
Yeah.
Because us African Americans, how many languages do you speak? Four? We speak one. You know what? It's not ours.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So don't never minimize your connection to your culture and your heritage. We're still just in discovery mode of finding out who we are. I believe the most important part of my work is the legacy. It's not what you do, it's not what you say, it's what you leave. And so I have a goal to teach individuals to take on this work and replicate it throughout the United States.